Started in 2004, and the reason I came into this war was because of the hockey stick graph and our center on climate, the Bjerknes Center, headed at that time by director Øystein Jansen, who I knew from the 70s. He was a Marxist-Leninist at that time. I was a more soft socialist. And I remember that these guys stood up when we had the meetings and said that we are going to shoot you. And he actually tried to take me out from the university in 2009. Because on a Sunday morning like this, I was sitting in my home and I got a telephone call from Paul Brekke. And he said, "Look at your laptop. I have just sent you a link that you have to read." And this link was to the ClimateGate emails. And then he said that I cannot go to the newspapers, they will fire me. And I said, I'm not worried about getting fired, so I will go. So I sent this early Sunday morning. I sent the link to 6 major newspapers in Norway. And I never realized what would happen afterwards, because I told these journalists that be ethical, don't give up your source. But one of these newspapers, Dagbladet, they actually cited my email to them and published it. I mean, where is the ethics in this? And in that email, I was so angry when I saw these emails and saw all the shit that these so-called climate researchers had produced, that I had written in my email that one of the spiders in this web is the director of Bjerknes Center, Øystein Jansen. So he could read in this newspaper that he was one of the spiders, you know, and he used it. I also said that this is a climate mafia. And some days afterwards, when this came out, then I realized that they were working at the top level. They had actually gone to our chancellor, who was also an earlier leader of this Marxist-Leninist party. His name was Grønmo. He was one of the 4 early leaders of the party. And then they worked behind the scene. I knew it from my leader at the institute. Tried actually to fire me. But my saving was that I was running a lot of big projects, so they couldn't fire me. I had to go on. And then I also got backing from the union leader. And he said that you cannot go on like this. Kvalheim has done what everybody should do. He has released things that is important for society. But what happened afterwards was that the 5 years before, we could actually publish things. I published in 2004 a big article together with a colleague on this hockey stick graph. And the reason I was so engaged was that I had been working with multivariate analysis and quantum chemistry and spectroscopy for a long time, so I knew these methods. And I saw immediately, when I saw this article, that it was nonsense, that they had done mistakes. And so I wanted to go out. But after that, I got an enemy, and that was Jansen and his gang, you know, that I had called mafia. So when he had this chance in 2009, he tried to take me. And later on, I had a debate with him, many years afterwards, for so-called green students. And I actually won that debate. I know that because afterwards I heard that some of these green students had changed their position. After that, he didn't want to debate with me anymore, you know. So that is also very typical, I think, of these guys. Okay. So this is actually a war that we are, it's a war against the people in the Western societies, in my opinion. They are trying to take away the foundation of the welfare states in Europe. And we have to fight this war and win, in my opinion. And I will say a little bit about how we think about this in the board of the climate realist in Norway. So actually I feel that we are on a mission to save these European welfare states. I don't know if you know this, but Europe has actually, since the financial crisis in 15 years ago, they have lost 30% already of competitive power compared to the United States. And it's unbelievable that these people are continuing on this path to destruction. And but now I see that voters have started to wake up. You have seen what has happened in Austria, what happened in Germany, and the same thing is going to happen in Norway. What we see now is that there is one of these parties, it's actually called a progressive party, but it's a right-wing party, and they are getting more and more serious about climate policy that is now destroying the possibility to have Norway as a welfare state in the future for the next generation. And the young people are coming. That's fantastic, you know. There was debate some time ago where they showed a poll of the youngest voter. And the Progressive Party had 37% among the young voters. And the Labour Party, who has been one of the parties who has gone down this destructive path, they had 5%. So they are on a path to silent death if they don't change, you know. So there is a change coming now, and it's fantastic. We have to help. So the only way we can do this, actually, we must change the voters and the political parties' delusion of an ongoing climate disaster. That is the way to win. And we don't need to have 50%. It's enough if we can actually change the parties so that they change their program. And the only thing we need to do is to delay this net zero, and then it will die, as Benny told yesterday. Things are happening. And it's fantastic. After 20 years, I can see the light in the end of the tunnel. But it has. I never thought that we should sit here 20 years after and continue this fight. So, how can we do this? It all has to do with information. We need to get our message out to the public. And we have to really show in a very simple way all these false claims that have been propagated by IPC and their followers in what I call the climate church. You know something, this climate church is a fantastic word, because actually the real church, the bishops, they are part of this climate church. They are not so interested in the old religion any longer. They are political disciples of this climate church. It's a religion, actually. It's a political and religious movement. And we see that actually some of the most primitive people in this movement, they are actually both religious in the old way and religious in this new way. I have been fighting against these people for so many years, you know. And they actually also have something called praying for the climate. Can you imagine praying for the climate? Yes. Fantastic. And we also have to show the consequences of the net zero paradigm for our welfare state and our freedom. You can even know if you want to eat meat, or you want to take a flight to go down to Spain to get away from the rain, you know, and then you can suddenly read in the newspapers and see on the television that you are making wrong choices. You have to save the climate. You shouldn't go on a plane. You shouldn't eat meat because this meat produces a lot of CO2 from the cows. Complete nonsense. But you can see it in the newspapers every day.
And you pay extra.
Hmm?
You pay extra
Yeah.
for the climate when you buy a ticket.
Yes, that's true. You can buy your own climate quota. I never pay it, you know. And we shouldn't, yeah. So, but no, we also need to know who we are fighting against. And we are actually, the fight is going on several different levels, and it's important to be on all these levels actually. We have these researchers that have developed all these falsified climate models that gives way too high temperature increase, and they are also wrong in the premises because they do some assumptions that are completely crazy regarding CO2 and water, for instance. I think many of you know this. And then mainstream media. And in Norway, these are often fully or partly paid by the authorities. Can you imagine? They are paying people who are destroying the basis of our welfare state. I think it's so ridiculous. It's so nonsense that when people will read about this 50 years from now, I think they must ask, what was going on there? It's so mad, the whole thing. And then these, in addition to all these misinterpretations that you have from the researchers, then they add their own thing about imaginary natural extreme weather and try to use this as a constant reminder of an imaginary climate crisis. When we had this hurricane in Florida some weeks ago, days before on our climate channel, as I call it, it's the same as BBC, NRK in Norway, you know. Days before they started to talk about this will be the worst hurricane in 100 years, it will be level 5. And then when it came, and it turned out to be level 3, it was still the first news. Can you imagine? But then they had to, of course, reduce a little bit because it also turned out that it quickly was reduced to level 1. But you could see this reporter, this journalist, he was actually disappointed, you know. He couldn't report this catastrophe that he had prepared for many days, you know. It's so complete madness. And then I also had to say, Western politicians with zero competence in climate science, they are competing on coming up with all kind of madness called climate policy. Climate policy, it means that we can actually, by policy, we can actually determine the weather in the future. Can you imagine how this can happen? And then, of course, it's not possible. As a chemist, I know that CO2 together with water is one of the most stable molecules you can think of. So how can we, and it's important, as you can see on this poster over here. It's important for food production, and almost everything we do, we produce some CO2. Even when we sit in this room, you know, we have a much higher level of CO2 than what you have in the atmosphere. And I don't think we are dying of that, you know. Yeah. And it's also very interesting to see that almost every other country in the world, with almost 90% of the population in the world, they have no net zero policy. They are actually increasing, and increasing mostly with coal. But we never read that in the newspapers. It has doubled since they started with this Paris Agreement. China is now up more than 30%. India is number 3 now with 8%, and they are increasing all the time. United States, who is number 2, reduced by 1.4% last year. And I think Europe is down to approximately 7-8% or something. So it doesn't matter, whatever we do, it will not help to reduce the CO2 level. It has absolutely no effect at all. And then also this thing, this is also very interesting in my opinion. You have these useful idiots. They are also paid by the government in Norway. We don't get anything from the government. We have 1,000 members that pay everything that we do. And we are trying to keep our expenses as low as possible. And of course this hampers a little bit what we can do. But all these other useful idiots, they get millions from the government to destroy the welfare state. Fantastic in my opinion. And then a new so-called green industry that is actually a black industry. They are using enormous amount of energy, like you heard yesterday from the Danish Søren, that they have to build up 10, 20 times the amount that you actually need on the average for energy, because these windmills and solar panels, they are not reliable sources. So this is also fantastic. I'm not sure how much we use actually, but we are talking about 20, 30 billions Norwegian kroner already. And it becomes more and more costly, of course, because the worst is still to come, because to actually reduce to net zero is of course not possible, but it's extremely expensive. For instance, this carbon dioxide capture that we are now spending a lot of money on here in Norway, and absolutely no impact on the atmosphere at all. And then I want to say a few things, because I think when we go out with information to people, we have to think about that not all the people that we want to reach to has a master degree in natural science. So we have to, I have seen how these people who are fighting against the windmills in Norway, it's a really big organization now, how they are going out with information, and it's easy to read, it's easy to understand. So I want to go out with information on a scientific level that is so easy and that cannot be debated. And in my opinion, there are only two critical questions. Are the increased concentration of CO2 caused by humans? And if so, does it matter? Is CO2 a major driver? And if you can ask, if you can answer this with a no on one of these, that is enough. That is the only thing you need. All the other thing is just scratching on the surface, more or less. And the first question, I think, since 2009, I have followed this human CO2 emissions and atmospheric CO2. And unfortunately, the squared correlation coefficient here is close to 1.0, which is perfect. So it's very hard for us, if we are going really to stress this first point, you have an uphill fight, in my opinion. And you can see 2020, that is an outlier, as we call it in statistics. And this is the COVID year. But otherwise, this is going up more or less linearly. And if you look at the world population, then it's even worse. The squared correlation coefficient is 0.986. Almost perfect, you know. And if you look at the world population and CO2, 0.989. And actually I can do a multivariate regression, a polynomial regression with only two terms, and I get perfect correlation. So I have always been a little bit skeptical to use this argument that humans are not responsible. And then I know that Jan Erik and others, Harde, they have made nice models and so on, but the correlation there is much weaker, much weaker than this. So therefore, I don't want to use this argument in the discussion with the public. I accept that, okay, it can be human that has posed this. But is it a problem? Is it really a problem that we have increased the CO2? You saw yesterday that this CO2 coalition has said that we have increased food production by 15 to 30% by this. Everybody knows that farmers use greenhouses where they increase fourfold the CO2 concentration to get more growth. So should we care about this? In my opinion, not. And the reason is this. If you look at the chemical facts about CO2 and water, then infrared absorbance is proportional to the concentration. So the absorbance is a critical thing here. CO2 has a very, very low concentration. I usually make this analog. I have a farm very close to a small city called Førde. It has 10,000 inhabitants. And then I ask people, if you suddenly saw 4 Chinese in Førde, would you say that that was a lot? No. Yeah, but that is what we are talking about here. It's 4 in 10,000. And if you look at water, on the average, the water concentration in the atmosphere is 6 times higher. And it's much higher than this. It's more than 50 times higher in the warm regions, where you really can get some infrared absorption. So, and also water has a much broader energy spectrum. I will never show this to the public, but you can see it yourself. Water has a very broad stretch region, and it's very high compared to this narrow and small one. So, what are we talking about here? Well, how do the climate researchers get rid of this? That is because they blame water's fantastic possibility to be greenhouse gas. They collapse it together with CO2 and blame CO2 for that. They call it, what is it in English? What?
Greenhouse gases.
Yeah, but this they call it strengthening of
Okay.
Forcing.
Yeah.
Forcing.
Yeah, forcing, yeah. And it's complete nonsense. Compare this with a drug. Let us say that you have a drug with 2 active components, and one has 99% and the other one has 1%. Then you will never say that the active component is the one with 1% and this with 99% of the active medication, for instance here, is the one that is not responsible for what the drug is doing to you. So I think this is so easy that we can just tell them CO2, very small concentration, almost no effect. So it doesn't matter. We can still continue to use fossil fuels. We can drive our cars. It will not change anything. It's the water. That is the only thing we have to do there. And so for the whole discussion, it doesn't matter if CO2 is mainly human-made or not. The effect is so weak compared to water. So why should you care about CO2? That is how I will do this. I will give it very simply, because I think that you have to address the public in a way that you don't talk to a person with a master degree in physics or mathematics the same way that you address the public. You have to give it very easily. So then, but we also have to focus on some of the false claims. And what is interesting is that this hockey stick graph, it's coming up, even if it has been rejected many times since it was published. It's coming up again and again in new ways, all the time. And this is used, as you know, if you compare this with what we heard about the climate and civilization yesterday, Mans and his followers, claim is that there was no temperature change since the birth of Christ until it started to rise after the Second World War. And it's of course complete nonsense, but they still give this false claim. And then the other thing that they use is that they try to use climate models, which in my opinion, I have worked with models my whole life. I started with quantum chemistry models and then empirical models. And these are not models. They are just some kind of scenarios. And if you look at the model that they have created, you will also see this. I will show it a little bit later on here. Yeah.
Can I have a question?
Okay. Yeah, very short. Yeah.
The absorbance is rather complicated. I don't think people.
No, but
how can you explain that simply? The absorption.
No, I can. I don't actually need to use absorbance either. I can just use the concentration since these are proportional. They are 100% correlated. Yeah. So I will not use, but usually the people discussing climate are using absorbance. Yeah. But we can instead talk about concentration and then 0.04%. But this was one of the reasons why I got so angry in 2009. Have you heard about the mantric? Yeah, here you can see it. The red line. Everybody thought when he published this that the red line was still these rings, yearly rings from trees, you know. But it was not. It was this. Super El Nino, 1998. He just put this on top of it. And that this was done deliberately. When you saw this going up like this, you know. But it makes absolutely no sense, because if CO2 was the driver of that, it cannot go up like that. It was El Nino, like we had also last year, a super El Nino. And I remember this very clearly because I was working with the salmon industry at that time, and they got problems because the prices on omega-3 went skyrocketing. So that changed the whole industry, this El Nino, this super El Nino, that they had to find new ways to make the food for the salmon industry. And so the mantric is just cheating. It has nothing to do with science, not at all. Cheating. And we have to say that. And then he will of course take us to court. He has tried many times to take people to court when they tell him that this is cheating, you know. But that's the true fact, it's cheating. And then these climate models, they are also cheating. Because you have more than 100 climate models. And you know that in natural science, only one model can be correct. So how do they get away with this? What they do is that they take 100 models, and then they calculate the average and say that this is the climate sensitivity. Complete nonsense. There can only be one correct model, and probably none of these models are correct at all. This was already in 2013. You could see that this was flattening out. And one of the reasons why these models are so crazy is also that the temperature measurements that they are using are crazy. And Jan Erik showed you this last paper, paper in the last volume of SCC about temperature. But this is only a part of it. H-Geom weather station, it's probably the objective temperature is more than 0.3, 0.4 wrong because of this aging of temperature. And also you have the urban heat island. That can also be shown when you calculate the global temperature, that this cannot be correct, because you get some of these weather stations that are so wrong, you know. And yeah, and there are also other things. I could say a lot about this. It's complete nonsense. One of the reasons why you always on the climate channel in Norway hear about new records of temperature is that Earlier, they measured temperature 4 times during a day, you know. Now they are measuring every second. So now they can actually hit exactly when you have the highest temperature or the lowest temperature. That didn't happen before. So then you can, and then you have new stations that have been there only for 30, 40 years and so. So of course you can get a new record because you don't have a long temperature record on that station. So this is known in also, since you have so many, this is known in statistics as multiple testing. And the more tests you make, the bigger is the chance of getting a wrong answer. So this is corrected for by something called false discovery rate. But they never correct anything in temperature records. They just try to find new records all the time. It's so nonsense that sometimes I just want to turn off the whole television when I see this guy coming up, you know, and telling me that we have no new temperature record. It hasn't been colder or warmer, usually, for 100 years or something. It's nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And the same with this global temperature. The confidence limits on these are much greater than 0.1 as they tell about. But they are actually recording that now we have a new record by 0.01, you know? Haven't they heard about confidence limits? It seems to me that these people have no interest in giving people correct science, you know. Just trying to build up this narrative all the time. That we are now going into an apocalyptic future where we are all being heated up. And this is an example that I published together with some colleagues in 2008. It was a big discussion on the television with this journalist and climate researcher in Bergen that, Bergen will come underwater, you know. And then I actually took real data because we have points in Bergen that are that you can measure relative to, that has been there for more than 100 years. And then I did a simple regression, and it turned out that, the level of water is lower than it was 100 years ago. And the reason for this is that because of the ice age, when the ice disappeared, we still have an increase every year that outcompetes the sea level rise, which is approximately 20 centimeters or something in 100 years in Bergen. But this is coming up over and over again, and they pay people in the Climate Research Center money. Every 5th year you have a new report, so I have given up, you know, on this one. And you can also see this picture that was taken 100 years ago at Bryggen. It was exactly the same. When you really had high tide, you get wet on your feet if you didn't have the right shoes. So again, complete nonsense. But I think we have to publish these kind of results that people can relate to. In Bergen, when we published this, we got a lot of interest from people because, yes, you are correct. This is completely correct. It's the same as it always has been, you know. But no, we cannot get this into newspapers any longer. So they can continue, but we cannot. So educating ordinary people in climate science, it means simple messages on critical issues. And if possible, illustrate with examples that they can relate to and has an interest in. So we cannot use the same everywhere. We have to use things that people actually know about and can relate to. That is very important. I have to say something about mainstream media and their role in the climate war. This is absolutely true in Norway. Most journalists, because they have measured it in polls, you know, most journalists sympathize with left-wing politics. Whether they are calling themselves green socialists or red socialists, they have probably 80-90% of the journalists are at that side, I would say. 80-90%. And they you have to also realize that the petroleum industry is regarded by these people as the ultimate phase of capitalism, which is of course complete nonsense in Norway, because when you start to calculate how much the petroleum industry is paying back to the society in Norway, revenue and taxes, 800 billions per year. The 200,000 people who are working there, 100 billions in direct taxes. And then we have this so-called oil fund, 500 billions. And when you calculate that, it means that 2/3 of the revenue that the government is using on the people is coming from this industry. And then these so-called red or green red, I think they call them, journalists, they are trying to tell us that this industry has to be stopped, you know. It's a part of the climate war, yeah. They use the climate crisis, and then they add up with all these kind of weather events. I'm soon coming to the conclusion here. Politicians and their role, of course. This is a new threat that you can frighten voters with, so they go and vote for you. But the interesting thing is that in Norway, politicians all over the spectrum, whether you are left-wing or right-wing, they are all agreeing until now on this net zero politics that will actually kill the Norwegian welfare state if it was done. You know? It's fantastic, huh? But now it is changing. We have a party there that is now very close to being the biggest party in Norway. So it will be a collapse of the old parties. Like Benny talked about yesterday about Farage, you know, who has now 20%. This has also more than 20% now on the polls. So we will see. It has the potential to destroy this political unity in Norway. This strategy that they also have has some very severe side effects. Something was mentioned yesterday. It has led to energy poverty. Even in Norway, we have more than 100% coverage of renewable energy from hydropower. But because the Danish and the Germans are tapping our resources, and the politician has learned that they can. This is a new way of taxing people, you know. They get 100 billions more now in tax indirectly because all these hydropower plants, they are owned by the government and the communities. So now they have found a new way of tapping people's money. And it also allows China and other countries to outcompete Western industry. And you have seen what has happened now in the United States, and if Trump is winning, I think that this will actually lead to something very interesting. More like a trade war, in my opinion, will happen. And then we will see what the European Union will do to meet this. And also this strategy of supporting this so-called green energy, this green industry, is absolutely not environmental friendly because it leads to excessive use of energy that we actually need. And it destroys nature. Windmills are not very nice, 250 meters high. They are not nice to the birds. They are not nice to the people who are living there. So, and then you have the mining and all these kind of things, you know. And then, interestingly enough, Norway is a big producer, yeah, of natural gas. We provide 40% of the energy in the European Union from Norwegian natural gas. And you have learned from newspapers and from all these climate researchers that natural gas, oh my God, that's pollution. But this is complete nonsense. If you look at the chemical reaction here, what you have is more than 90% of natural gas is CH4. Can you see how many hydrogens there are already in this one? So when you talk about producing hydrogen, what a nonsense. It's already, the hydrogen is there and it's free, you know. You don't have to do anything. The nature has done everything you need. 60% of the energy is from hydrogen, from burning of hydrogen. But it's impossible to convey this to the public when you don't get into the newspapers. Instead, European politicians want to spend 3 to 10 times this energy to produce pure hydrogen and ammonia. The worst thing is actually the so-called green energy, because then you lose a lot on the windmills, and then you lose again when you try to produce hydrogen. So it's complete nonsense. This will stop eventually. It cannot go on, you know. Not in Denmark, not any other places. And here are some examples from Norway that is going on. CO2 capture, complete disaster. They call this, they try to come up with a fancy name, you know, Northern Light Longship Vikings. The Vikings would never have done something so stupid. No, never. Battery factories, some are already bankrupt, and they are suing the government now because they don't get more support, you know. Interesting. Electrification of Norwegian petroleum industry, which means that you need cables, you need windmills, you know. And still you have to have these turbines, these natural gas producers as backup. So it doesn't help anything. It's so nonsense. And the worst thing now is ocean wind parks that are floating, you know. And it's skyrocketing prices. So we had, some weeks ago, there was a debate that showed that, oh, what a nonsense. So we have to get rid of these politicians that are doing this. And consequences for Norwegian society's consumers, high and volatile energy prices. We always had low energy prices. Now suddenly they go up hours by hours. Because, you know the reason. The Danes and the Germans are tapping our reservoirs. But now there is a political movement in Norway that want to stop this, you know. So they will not be able to continue this for a long time. So now I'm just at the end now. I have 2 slides, okay? How will we stop this suicide cult in Norway? Information is the most critical thing. We need to go out and efficiently explain to the new politician that we need, to the public, that this is actually pseudoscience. It has nothing to do with science. It's nonsense. And we have to, we want to establish an advisory board of experts to present social and economic consequences of this so-called climate policy. So we are working with that in the climate realists now. Really top experts, because they have seen that this is nonsense. And then we have to argue that the small increase in atmospheric CO2 is desirable, both for food production and life on Earth. And actually in Norway, and also in Sweden, you are already net zero. Did you know that? Yeah. Because the forest is taking up. But we have made laws in Norway that doesn't count this. The nature's own free way of getting rid of CO2. Can you imagine? And then I try to explain to people, we are not talking about net zero, we are talking about minus 100% or something, if they continue with this. And then we have to recruit, activate and educate members. We are working with this also. Material for study circles. We also want to produce a theme and data bank on climate-related topics. I have backed completely Jan Erik. I talked with him about SEC. I want just as much as him that this must be independent, so we don't get into this problem that tell that it's the climate deniers who are running this journal, you know. It has to be clearly independent, and no, it's also economically healthy, so that helps. And we will also collaborate with other organizations. So this is the last one. This is a picture how beautiful nature is if we don't interfere too much with all this climate policy and windmills. This is just outside my boathouse at my farm on a very nice summer day. Yeah.
Thank you very much.